I'm writing this from my apartment in Portland, but I keep checking the locks on my door and windows. What happened to me 3 weeks ago in rural Idaho still doesn't feel real, but the scars on my feet and the claw marks on my car paint are proof enough. I need to tell someone about this, even if no one believes me. Maybe, especially if no one believes me. My name is Derek Sullivan, and I'm a freelance graphic designer. I work mostly with tech startups, designing logos and websites for companies that have more venture capital than sense. It's decent money when the projects come in, but the work can be feast or famine. 3 weeks ago, I landed a huge contract with a Portland-based app company. 6 figures for a complete rebrand, but with an impossible deadline. 2 weeks to completely overhaul their visual identity. I knew I needed to get out of the city to focus. My apartment in the Pearl District is great for networking and nightlife, but terrible for concentration. Between the construction noise, my roommate's girlfriend practically living there, and the constant temptation to hit the bars on Burnside, I wasn't going to get anything done. That's when I decided to book an Airbnb somewhere remote. I needed total isolation, no distractions, no noise, just me and my laptop in the middle of nowhere for a week of intensive work. I found the perfect place on a Tuesday night while scrolling through listings. A log cabin near Timber Falls, Idaho, about 6 hours drive from Portland. The photos were stunning, rustic but modern, with huge windows overlooking a mountain valley, a stone fireplace, and what looked like the kind of artistic lighting that would be perfect for late-night design sessions. But the best part was the price, $40 a night. For a place that looked like it should cost 10 times that much, it was an absolute steal. The reviews were perfect too. Dozens of 5-star ratings praising the location, the amenities, and the host's communication. The host was listed as Emma, with a profile picture of a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair. Her bio mentioned that she'd inherited the family cabin and wanted to share its beauty with travelers. Everything seemed legitimate, professional, exactly what I was looking for. There were a few odd things about the booking, but nothing that seemed like red flags at the time. Emma only communicated through the Airbnb app. No phone number listed, no option for direct contact. The calendar showed the cabin was only available for exactly 7 nights, starting that Thursday. And when I tried to book for longer, the system wouldn't let me extend the stay. But I was desperate to get out of the city and start working, so I booked it immediately. Emma's response came within minutes. "Welcome to our mountain retreat, Derek. You'll find everything you need for a peaceful and productive stay. Please read the house guidelines carefully. They're for your safety and comfort. Looking forward to hosting you." I threw clothes and equipment into my car Thursday morning and hit the road by 9 o'clock. The drive started normally enough. Interstate 84 east through the Columbia River Gorge, then south into Oregon's high desert country. But after I crossed into Idaho, the landscape became increasingly remote and wild. The last hour of the drive was on increasingly narrow mountain roads, winding through dense forests of pine and fir. My cell phone signal died about 30 miles from the destination, which wasn't entirely surprising in such remote terrain. But it did mean I was relying entirely on the GPS directions I downloaded before losing signal. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by towering trees and backed by a steep mountain slope. It was even more beautiful than the photos had suggested. A perfect blend of rustic charm and modern comfort. Solar panels on the roof, a satellite dish for internet, but still that authentic log cabin aesthetic that made you feel like you'd stepped back in time. I parked next to a neat woodpile and grabbed my bags. The air was crisp and clean, so quiet I could hear my own breathing. No traffic noise, no city sounds, just the whisper of wind through pine branches. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. The front door was unlocked, with a key hanging from a hook beside it. Emma had messaged that I could let myself in, and that all the information I needed would be waiting inside. The interior was as impressive as the exterior. Hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Everything was immaculate, like it had been professionally cleaned just for my arrival. I set up my laptop on the dining room table, positioned to take advantage of the spectacular mountain view through the large windows. The internet connection was surprisingly fast for such a remote location. Everything was perfect for a week of intensive creative work. It was while I was exploring the kitchen, looking for coffee supplies, that I found the note. It was handwritten on cream-colored paper, placed prominently on the granite counter where I couldn't miss it. The handwriting was careful and feminine, the same style I'd seen in the welcome message from Emma. House rules. Please read carefully. Welcome to Mountain View Cabin. To ensure your safety and comfort during your stay, please observe the following guidelines. Never leave any lights on after 11 o'clock at night. Do not open the basement door under any circumstances. If you hear knocking at night, do not answer. It will stop on its own. Keep all curtains closed between sunset and sunrise. The well water is safe to drink, but never draw water after dark. Do not go outside barefoot. Always wear shoes. If animals gather near the house at night, stay inside and avoid looking at them. Never use the fireplace. Use electric heating only. These rules exist for your protection. The mountain environment can be unpredictable. Enjoy your stay. Emma. I read the list twice, trying to make sense of it. Most of the rules seemed like standard rural safety guidelines. Don't go outside barefoot because of snakes or sharp rocks. Keep curtains closed for privacy and warmth. Avoid drawing well water after dark because you might fall in or disturb nocturnal animals. But some of them were oddly specific. Why never use the fireplace when there was a perfectly good supply of split wood outside? Why not open the basement door? And the rule about not answering knocking at night seemed less about safety and more about something else. Still, I'd stayed in enough rural places to know that country folks had their particular ways of doing things. Maybe there were bears in the area, or the fireplace had a draft problem. The basement might have structural issues, or old wiring that wasn't safe. I decided to follow the rules without worrying too much about the reasoning behind them. I was here to work, not to explore every corner of the property. I spent the rest of Thursday afternoon setting up my workspace and beginning the preliminary sketches for the rebrand project. The setting was perfect, inspiring mountain views, complete silence except for natural sounds, and a comfortable environment that felt both rustic and professional. As the sun set behind the western peaks, I automatically closed the curtains as instructed. I used the electric baseboard heaters instead of the fireplace, made dinner with ingredients I'd brought from Portland, and settled in for a productive evening of work. Around 10:30, I realized I was making great progress and felt like continuing past my usual bedtime. But the rule about lights after 11 was specific, so I wrapped up my work and turned everything off right at 11. Within minutes, I was asleep in the comfortable master bedroom, lulled by the absolute silence of the deep woods. I woke up Friday morning feeling more rested than I had in months. The mountain air, the silence, the complete absence of urban stress. It all combined to create the most restful sleep I'd experienced in years. I made coffee with the well water, perfectly safe during daylight hours, according to the rules, and sat at the dining room table, watching the sunrise paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and pink. It was going to be a perfect week. I spent Friday morning diving deep into the design work, making more progress in 4 hours than I usually managed in a full day back in Portland. The combination of inspiration from the natural setting and complete freedom from distractions was exactly what I had hoped for. Around noon, I decided to drive into Timber Falls to stock up on groceries and get a feel for the local area. The town was about 20 miles away by winding mountain roads, a small community that looked like it belonged on a postcard. Main Street had the usual collection of rural businesses: a general store, a diner, a gas station, and a few other shops that catered to both locals and the occasional tourist. I stopped at Patterson's general store to pick up supplies. The elderly woman behind the counter was friendly in that genuine small-town way, asking about my visit and making recommendations for local hiking trails. "I'm staying up at the Mountain View cabin," I mentioned while she was ringing up my groceries. "Beautiful place. The host, Emma, really has something special there." The woman's expression changed slightly, becoming more guarded. "Oh, you're staying at the old Morrison place," she said, not meeting my eyes. How long are you there for?" "Just a week, working on a big project, needed somewhere quiet." "That's good," she said, but her tone suggested it wasn't entirely good. "You make sure to follow any guidelines Emma gave you. Rural living can be different from what city folks are used to." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she'd already moved on to discussing the weather and local road conditions. Still, I noticed that she seemed relieved when I mentioned I was only staying a week. Like longer might have been problematic. The drive back to the cabin took me through some of the most beautiful mountain scenery I'd ever seen. Towering peaks, dense forests, clear streams running alongside the road. But I also noticed just how isolated the cabin really was. Once I turned off the main highway, I didn't see another house or even a mailbox for the final 10 miles. The cabin sat at the end of a dead-end road with no neighbors visible in any direction. That level of isolation was exactly what I'd wanted for focused work. But there was something about the absolute solitude that felt more intense than I'd expected. Friday evening followed the same routine as Thursday. I worked until just before 11, closed all the curtains at sunset, turned off the lights right at 11, and went to bed. The silence was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat, but I slept deeply and woke refreshed. Saturday morning brought my first hint that something wasn't quite normal about the place. I woke up and went to the kitchen to make coffee, looking out through the window over the sink at the beautiful mountain morning. That's when I noticed the footprints. Small, muddy prints crossed the wooden deck outside the kitchen window. They were roughly human-shaped, but seemed too narrow, too long for normal feet. And they weren't there when I'd gone to bed the night before. I was certain of that, because I'd admired the clean deck while closing the curtains. The prints started at the edge of the deck, nearest the forest, and crossed to the front door, where they seemed to stop, like someone or something had walked up to the house during the night and tried the door. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or other small animal. Mountain wildlife could leave tracks that looked surprisingly human-like, especially in mud, and rural properties always had animals passing through. But the size and shape of the prints kept bothering me as I worked that morning. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to explore a bit more of the property. I'd been so focused on work that I hadn't really examined the cabin thoroughly. That's when I noticed the basement door. It was in a hallway off the kitchen, painted the same white as the other interior doors, but somehow more substantial. When I tried the handle, it was locked. Not just locked, there were 3 separate deadbolts installed, all engaged. The door itself looked like it had been reinforced, with metal strips around the frame and what appeared to be soundproofing material around the edges. Why would someone need such extreme security for a basement? And why was it so important that guests never open it? I searched through the kitchen drawers and found a small collection of keys hanging on a hook inside one of the cabinets. Several of them looked like they might fit the basement locks, but I remembered the rule: do not open the basement door under any circumstances. Instead, I went back to work, but with a growing sense of curiosity about what might be down there. Saturday evening brought the first truly unsettling event. I was working late, completely absorbed in a complex design problem, when I heard the knocking. It started at exactly 11:15, soft, rhythmic knocking that seemed to come from the front door. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. It continued with mechanical regularity, never varying in rhythm or intensity. My first instinct was to go answer it. Even though I was in the middle of nowhere, it could be a neighbor needing help, or maybe Emma stopping by to check on the property. But rule number 3 was specific. If you hear knocking at night, do not answer. It will stop on its own. So I sat at the dining room table, trying to concentrate on my work, while the knocking continued. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. After about 10 minutes, the sound seemed to move around the house, now coming from the kitchen window, then from the back door, then from what sounded like the roof. It was unsettling, but I reminded myself that mountain wildlife could make all sorts of strange sounds. Maybe it was a woodpecker or some other nocturnal animal that had developed an odd behavioral pattern. The knocking continued for exactly 1 hour, stopping abruptly at 12:15. The silence afterward felt heavier somehow, more oppressive. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I tried to get back to work, but my concentration was shot. I kept listening for the knocking to resume, jumping at every natural sound of the old cabin settling or wind in the trees. Eventually, I gave up and went to bed, though it took hours to fall asleep. Sunday morning, I found more evidence that something had been around the cabin during the night. The muddy footprints were back, but this time They circled the entire house, and there were scratches in the dirt around the well. Long, deep marks that looked deliberate rather than random. I tried to focus on work, but my productivity was definitely affected. The design project that had been going so smoothly was suddenly feeling more difficult, my creative flow interrupted by constant awareness of my isolation and the growing strangeness of the situation. That evening, I decided to message Emma through the Airbnb app. I wanted to ask about the knocking, about the footprints, about the basement door. But when I tried to send a message, I got only generic automated responses about checking in and check-out procedures. It was like Emma wasn't really monitoring the messages, or like the app was filtering my communications. Sunday night brought more knocking, following the exact same pattern, 11:15 to 12:15, starting at the front door and moving around the house. I forced myself to follow the rule and didn't answer, but the experience was even more unsettling the second time. Monday morning, I was seriously considering cutting my stay short. The cabin was beautiful, and the isolation had been perfect for work, but the weird nocturnal activities were becoming too distracting. I had 4 more days on my booking, but I was starting to think I'd be more productive back in noisy Portland than dealing with whatever was happening here. But the design project was at a critical stage, and I really did need the quiet environment to finish it properly. I decided to stick it out, maybe ask some questions in town when I went for supplies. That afternoon, I drove back to Patterson's general store in Timber Falls. Mrs. Patterson was behind the counter again, and she seemed genuinely surprised to see me. "You're still up at the Morrison place?" she asked, with what sounded like concern. "Yeah, through Thursday. Though I have to ask, is there wildlife in the area that might knock on doors at night? I've been hearing some strange sounds." Her expression became guarded again. Mountain wildlife can be unpredictable. That's why it's important to follow whatever guidelines Emma gave you. Don't go outside after dark. Don't try to investigate strange sounds. These mountains have their own way of doing things. What kind of things? But she'd already moved on to helping another customer, clearly not wanting to continue the conversation. I noticed that the other locals in the store had gone quiet when I mentioned the cabin, like they were listening, but trying not to be obvious about it. I bought my supplies and left, but with the distinct feeling that everyone in Timber Falls knew something about the Mountain View cabin that they weren't sharing with outsiders. That night, Monday night, was when I made my first real mistake. I was working on a particularly complex design element, completely lost in the creative flow, when I glanced at the clock and realized it was 11:30. I'd been working with all the lights on, completely forgetting about the rule. I quickly turned off everything except a small desk lamp and tried to get back to work. But within minutes, the temperature in the cabin plummeted. It went from comfortable room temperature to what felt like near freezing in the span of maybe 5 minutes. My breath started coming out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the windows. Then the scratching started. It sounded like claws or fingernails dragging across the roof, moving from one end of the cabin to the other with deliberate, measured steps. Something large was walking around up there, occasionally stopping to scratch at the shingles like it was testing their strength. At the same time, I heard movement around the perimeter of the house, footsteps in the dead leaves. but not the careful steps of a person. Something that moved with an odd, loping gait that didn't sound quite human. I huddled in the bedroom with all the lights off, listening to the sounds circle the cabin until dawn. Whatever was out there seemed frustrated, like it was looking for a way in, but couldn't find one. The scratching on the roof became more aggressive, and something kept testing the doors and windows, pushing against them with enough force to make the walls creak. But as soon as the sun came up, everything stopped. The temperature returned to normal, the sound ceased, and the cabin felt like a normal, peaceful place again. Tuesday morning, I found claw marks gouged into the wooden deck railing and deep scratches in the dirt all around the house. Whatever had been circling the cabin during the night had left clear evidence of its presence. That's when I decided I needed to know what was really going on. I spent Tuesday morning searching through the cabin more thoroughly, looking for clues about its history and about Emma. In a closet in the master bedroom, I found a box of old documents, property records, insurance papers, and what looked like previous guest books. The property records showed that the cabin had been owned by the Morrison family for over 50 years. But Emma Morrison had died in 2008, according to a newspaper clipping I found. She'd been found dead in the cabin under what the article described as suspicious circumstances, though no further details were provided. So who had been communicating with me through the Airbnb app? The guest books were even more disturbing. Entry after entry from visitors who'd stayed at the cabin over the years, many describing experiences similar to mine. Knocking at night, strange sounds, rules that seemed arbitrary but turned out to be critically important. But the most recent entries told a different story. Guests who tried to break the rules, who decided to investigate the strange phenomena, who'd opened doors they were told to keep closed. Those entries stopped mid-sentence, like the writers had been interrupted and never returned to finish their thoughts. I found the keys to the basement again and stood in front of that reinforced door for a long time, debating whether to open it. Every rational instinct told me to follow the rules, to accept that some things were better left alone. But I needed to understand what was happening here. Tuesday night, I decided to test the rules systematically. First, I left a single lamp on past 11 o'clock. The temperature drop was immediate, and I could hear movement outside within minutes. But when I turned the lamp off, the activity stopped. Next, I crept to one of the windows and opened the curtain just a crack to look outside. What I saw made my blood freeze. Pale figures were standing among the trees around the cabin, dozens of them, perfectly still, all facing the house. In the moonlight, they looked almost human, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that human joints shouldn't allow. I quickly closed the curtain and backed away from the window, my heart pounding. Whatever those things were, the rules about keeping curtains closed and not looking at gathering animals suddenly made perfect sense. Wednesday morning, I found the basement key that fit all 3 locks. The basement was larger than I'd expected, clearly older than the rest of the cabin. It had been set up as some kind of shelter or safe room, canned food, bottled water, sleeping bags, and battery-powered equipment, like someone had prepared for a siege. But it was the journal I found that explained everything. It was Emma Morrison's diary, covering the last months of her life in 2008. She'd inherited the cabin from her family and discovered that it sat on some kind of supernatural hunting ground. The forest around the property was home to entities that fed on human fear and eventually human life, but they were bound by certain rules and limitations. Emma had figured out how to survive by establishing the guidelines that protected visitors. Keep lights off after 11 because the entities were drawn to illumination. Never go outside barefoot because they left traps and sharp objects. Don't answer knocking because acknowledging their presence gave them more power. But Emma had made a mistake. She'd tried to help a guest who'd broken too many rules, going outside to rescue them. The entities had taken her instead. The journal's final entry was chilling. I can feel them changing me. I'm not fully human anymore, but maybe I can still help future guests. If I can find a way to communicate through the rental listing, maybe I can keep the rules alive. Maybe I can save some people, even if I couldn't save myself. Emma's ghost was the one managing the Airbnb listing, trying to protect visitors with the rules she'd learned the hard way. But I also learned something else from the journal. The entities couldn't enter the cabin as long as someone followed the rules. But they could take anyone who broke too many rules, adding them to the pale figures that gathered in the forest at night. All those previous guests who'd stopped writing mid-sentence, they were still here, still trapped, still serving whatever ancient hunger lived in these mountains. Wednesday night, I made a decision that probably saved my life and definitely changed it forever. I decided to break all the rules at once and force a confrontation. At 11 o'clock, I turned on every light in the cabin. I opened all the curtains. I unlocked and opened the front door. I even tried to get the fireplace started, though the damper seemed to be rusted shut. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The temperature didn't just drop. It plummeted so fast that ice formed on every surface in the house. The pale figures emerged from the forest, moving toward the cabin with predatory purpose. Something large splashed in the well outside, and I realized that whatever lived down there was another part of the ecosystem of entities that surrounded this place. But the most terrifying thing was the knocking. It wasn't just at the doors now. It was coming from inside the walls, like something was trying to break through from within the structure itself. That's when Emma appeared. She materialized in the living room, translucent but clearly defined, looking exactly like the profile picture from the Airbnb listing. But there was desperation in her ghostly features, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 15 years of regret. "You have to get to the basement," she said. "It's the only safe place when all the rules are broken. They can't follow you there." "What about my car?" I asked, already knowing it was probably too late. "They'll have disabled it by now. The basement is your only chance." But I'd spent 3 days reading about people who'd hidden in the basement and never emerged. I wasn't going to become another pale figure in the forest. "There has to be another way," I said. "There is," Emma admitted, "but it's dangerous. If you can reach your car and get it started, if you can make it to the main road before they catch you, you'll be safe. They can't follow beyond the property boundaries." I looked out through the open front door. My car was maybe 50 yards away, but the space between the cabin and the vehicle was filled with pale figures. Dozens of them, all former guests who'd broken too many rules and been claimed by whatever lived in this forest. They were all like you, Emma said sadly. Curious, brave, unable to just follow the rules and stay safe. The entities feed on that curiosity, use it to lure people into making fatal mistakes. I made my choice. I was going to run for the car. I kicked off my shoes. If I was going to run for my life, I needed to be fast, and the rule about not going barefoot seemed like the least of my worries now. I took a deep breath and sprinted out the front door. The pale figures moved to intercept me immediately. They were fast, inhumanly fast, but they seemed to move in predictable patterns. I dodged between them, focusing on the car and trying not to look directly at their faces. That was probably smart, because what I caught in my peripheral vision was disturbing enough. They had been human once, but whatever had claimed them had changed them. Their limbs were too long, their skin was paper white, and their eyes reflected the cabin's light like an animal's. I reached the car and yanked the door open, diving into the driver's seat, just as icy fingers grabbed at my legs. The engine turned over once, twice, but didn't catch. The pale figures surrounded the vehicle, pressing against the windows with their transformed faces. Then I heard Emma's voice in my passenger seat. She was sitting beside me, her ghostly presence somehow making the car feel warmer. "Turn the key and hold it," she said. "Count to 5, then try again. The mountain air affects the engine." I followed her instructions, and on the third try, the engine roared to life. I threw the car into reverse and backed away from the cabin, pale figures scattering from the vehicle. But they didn't give up. As I turned the car around and headed down the dirt road, they followed. Some ran alongside the car, keeping pace despite my increasing speed. Others seemed to move through the forest parallel to the road, taking shortcuts through the trees. "Drive faster," Emma urged. "You have to reach the main road before sunrise, or they'll be able to follow you into town." I pushed the car as hard as I dared on the winding mountain road. In my rearview mirror, I could see dozens of pale figures giving chase, some running on the road behind me, others moving through the trees like ghosts themselves. The main road was still miles away, and I could see the first hint of dawn on the eastern horizon. If Emma was right, I was running out of time. That's when I felt the car shudder and heard a scraping sound from underneath. Something had grabbed onto the chassis and was trying to stop the vehicle. I pressed the accelerator harder, and whatever was holding on lost its grip with a screech of claws on metal. The main road appeared ahead, marked by a reflective highway sign that seemed to glow in my headlights. I crossed onto the asphalt just as the sun crested the mountains, flooding the valley with golden light. In my rearview mirror, the pale figures had stopped at the property line, unable or unwilling to follow me onto public land. Emma's ghost smiled sadly from the passenger seat. "You made it," she said. "You're one of the few who ever has." "What about you?" I asked. "Can you leave now?" She shook her head. "I'm bound to the property. But maybe someday, if enough people learn to avoid the place, the entities will starve and I'll be free." She was already fading as the sunrise grew brighter. "Be careful who you tell about this. Most people won't believe you, and the ones who do might be curious enough to visit." She vanished as I reached the Timber Falls town limits. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, my feet bleeding, and my hands shaking from adrenaline. The deputy on duty was a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But when I mentioned the Morrison cabin, his attention sharpened immediately. "You stayed up there?" he asked. "How long?" "6 days. But I had to leave early because of the wildlife," he interrupted firmly. "Lots of dangerous animals in those mountains. Bears, mountain lions. People shouldn't stay up there alone." But I could tell from his expression that he knew exactly what I'd encountered, and it wasn't wildlife. A few minutes later, an older man in a sheriff's uniform came out from a back office. His name tag read Patterson, and I realized he was probably related to the woman from the general store. "Son," Sheriff Patterson said, "I'm glad you made it down safely. That property has a history of accidents, people going missing, unexplained deaths. We've tried to have it condemned, but the ownership situation is complicated." "What do you mean?" "Legally, the cabin is still owned by Emma Morrison's estate. But she's been dead for 15 years, and there's no clear heir. The property management company that runs the Airbnb listing pays the taxes and maintains the place, but we can't prove they have any legal right to do so." "Can't you shut it down?" "We've tried, but every time we get close to building a legal case, the company's lawyers make the problems go away. They have connections, money, influence, and frankly, the property brings tourist dollars to the area. People book that cabin, they shop in our stores, eat at our diner, buy gas for their cars." The implication was clear. The local economy benefited from whatever was happening up at the Morrison cabin, even if it cost lives. "How many people have died there?" I asked. Sheriff Patterson was quiet for a long moment. "Officially, none. People disappear, but without bodies we can't prove they're dead. We list them as missing persons who probably got lost in the wilderness." "And unofficially?" "Dozens, maybe more. That cabin has been luring people to their deaths for years, and there's not much we can do about it legally." I left Timber Falls that morning and drove straight back to Portland, stopping only for gas and coffee. My feet needed medical attention. Running barefoot through the mountain forest had left them badly cut, and my car had claw marks scored into the paint that I'd have to explain to my insurance company. But I was alive, which was more than I could say for most people who'd stayed at the Mountain View cabin. When I got back to my apartment, I immediately checked the Airbnb listing. The cabin was still available, with the same beautiful photos and perfect reviews. My own booking showed as completed, and there was an automated message asking me to leave a review of my stay. I tried to write a review warning future guests about what they'd encounter, but the Airbnb platform wouldn't let me post it. Every time I tried to mention the rules, the strange sounds, or the pale figures in the forest, the system flagged my review as inappropriate content and refused to publish it. I tried contacting Airbnb customer service directly, but they insisted they had no record of any problems with the property. According to their system, every guest had left positive reviews and no complaints had ever been filed. The platform was either complicit in what was happening or somehow being manipulated by the same supernatural forces that controlled the cabin. Over the following weeks, I tried everything I could think of to warn people. I created fake social media accounts to post warnings, tried to contact travel bloggers and horror writers, even considered going to the media. But every attempt to expose the truth was blocked, ignored, or dismissed as fiction. The worst part was watching the booking calendar. New reservations appeared regularly. Solo travelers like me, couples looking for a romantic getaway, families wanting to experience the mountain wilderness, all of them heading toward the same trap that had nearly claimed my life. Just last week, I saw that someone had booked the cabin for a full week in November. A young woman from Seattle named Jessica, based on the review she left afterward. Except her review was obviously fake. The same generic praise that all the reviews used, posted by someone who clearly hadn't actually experienced what the cabin had to offer. Which means Jessica probably didn't make it out alive. I'm writing this story because I can't save the people who booked that cabin, but maybe I can save some others. If you ever see an Airbnb listing for a mountain cabin near Timber Falls, Idaho, with a host named Emma and an impossibly low price, don't book it. And if you're ever staying in a remote rental property and you find a list of oddly specific rules, follow them exactly. Someone probably died learning what happens when you break them. The entities in the forest around the Morrison cabin are still there, still hunting, still adding to their collection of pale figures that gather at night. Emma's ghost is still trying to protect people with her rules, but she can't save everyone. I managed to escape, but I'll never forget the sound of claws scraping against my car, or the sight of dozens of former guests standing motionless among the trees, or Emma's sad smile as she faded away in the morning light. Some places aren't meant for the living. The Mountain View cabin is one of them, but it's still taking reservations.